Welcome. Another week and another book. This week I'll be talking about Friends of Israel and how it exposes Israel's strategic cooperation with mainly British politics. It's written by Hil Aked and it's a true gem. Yet another one of those books that is basically a must read for anyone who's interested in the conflict in the Middle East. So, in these tumultuous and, dare I say, often painfully simplistic discourse surrounding the whole Israeli-Palestine issue in the West, clarity is a rare commodity. The public square is a battleground of competing narratives, where accusations of anti-Semitism are wielded as frequently as charges of apartheid, and where genuine debate is often just drowned out by performative moral outrages without any real grounds. It is into this morass of the banality of nothingness that Hill meticulously has researched Friends of Israel. Now, it enters, it doesn't really begin with, it's not a book that tears up heaven and hell, but it's a quiet book. It's written with a devastating force of forensic evidence, which me myself, as a lawyer, of course, love. Akid is an academic and a researcher, and he provides a systematic and very sobering analysis of how the Israeli advocacy network in the United Kingdom operates, not merely to defend Israeli government policy, but to actively undermine and dismantle Palestine solidarity activism in the United Kingdom. Now, central to this project, as the book masterfully illustrates, are two very intertwined and very potent strategies. It is a sophisticated cultivation of influence and also the development of lawfare, one of my favorite subjects. That is, the use of the legal system to silence and intimidate critics from Israel all the way to the United Kingdom. Now, Akid's work is not a polemic book about the rights and wrongs about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict as such. Of course, the sympathies are clear, but rather, Akid has managed to do a political, sociological writing. So it asks a very deceptively simple question. How does a foreign state and above that also a state frequently implicated with serious violation of international law. Mind you, the book was finished in 2023 before the latest atrocities. Anyway, how does Israel maintain such a resilient and often unconditional support within the corridors of power in a major Western democracy such as the United Kingdom? The answer is pieced together over the book's chapter, and it reveals a very complex ecosystem of advocacy groups, parliamentarian fractions, very well-funded initiatives, and the legal shenanigans and maneuvering within the concept of lawfare. All this working in concert to reshape the political and legal landscape in Israel's favor. So, the most striking contribution of Friends of Israel is its detailed mapping of the institutional channels through which pro-Israel influence is woven into the fabric of British politics. Akid moves beyond the simplistic notion of a lobby as a shadowy cabal, and instead presents a diffuse but coordinated network. At the heart of this network are organizations like Conservative Friends of Israel, Labor Friends of Israel, and BICOM, Britain Israel Communication and Research Center, all working more or less out in the open, but all with a very well managed agenda. Aked's analysis of conservative Friends of Israel is particularly illuminating. Uh, it describes it not as a casual parliamentarian group, but as a key pillar within the British political establishment. The book details how both conservative and Labour Friends of Israel functions as a formidable political machine. It is one of the largest and best funded foreign policy groups in the British Parliament, boasting the support of a vast majority of members of Parliament. Its influence is there, and it's also used through several key mechanisms within the British governmental system. So, there are financial donations from pro-Israel donors to both Liberal and Conservative parties and individual members of parliament. And also, of course, the Friends of Israel get their financial clout. And it's well documented how the trips are organized to Israel for the members of parliament and the journalists who are deemed worthy of being able to go there. These trips are less about education and more about inoculation, building a strong cohort of politicians whose understanding of the conflict is filtered through the Israeli security lens, framing Palestinians primarily as a threat to be managed. The book very acutely demonstrates how the Friends of Israel members in parliament are strategically placed in key government positions, from the Prime Minister's office to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and of course the defense portfolios. This ensures that pro-Israel sentiment is not a opinion that's out there in the fringes, but is embedded at the highest level of British decision making. When policy discussions occur, the Israeli government line is often has powerful internal advocates. Aked provides concrete examples of how this influence has manifested itself, from the UK's consistent opposition to Palestinian moves for statehood at the UN to its rhetorical shifts or lack thereof during military assaults on Gaza. The Israeli advocacy complex, partly, can be compared to a military industrial complex, but anyway, the Israeli advocacy complex, as I call it, situates groups like the Friends of Israel within a broader Israeli advocacy complex that includes think tanks, media monitoring organization, PR firms, the illustrious BICOM, and it kind of acts like a central hub for producing research, briefing paper, and talking points that are then quickly sent out to politicians, journalists, and other influencers. This creates a coherent and self-reinforcing echo chamber within the British political system. A Conservative member of Parliament might receive a briefing from Conservative Friends of Israel that have read a BICOM-sponsored report in a think tank publication, and then the same arguments are echoed by a commentator in a mainstream newspaper before the Labour Friends of Israel are presented to the same document. The effect is to normalize pro-Israeli positions and marginalize dissenting voices as extreme or illegitimate towards the Palestinian cause. The book also tackles the more complex dynamics within the Labour Party, particularly during Jeremy Corbyn's era. Here, Aked analyzes how groups like Labour Friends of Israel, alongside externally aligned organizations such as the Jewish Labour Movement and campaigns like the Enough is Enough anti-Semitism awareness tour, worked solely to tarnish the leadership and the broader Palestine solidarity movement by conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. Aked is careful not to dismiss the genuine concerns about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, but Aked is also meticulously distinguishes these from the politically motivated weaponization of the issue in order to discredit a leadership that was historically and in Israel's eyes dangerously sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. The anti-Corbyn backlash, as documented in the book, was in part a successful effort by Israel and its advocacy network to protect the bipartisan consensus on Israel by neutralizing a political threat in another country. If the cultivation of political friends is the soft power of the advocacy network, then lawfare is the hard edge. Aked devotes quite a significant amount of her book to how legal and quasi-legal mechanisms have been systematically developed in order to stifle free speech, punish critics, and redefine the boundaries of the acceptable discourse on the Israel-Palestine question within the United Kingdom, at least up until the latest 7th of November war. uh, 7th of October, pardon me. The most prominent example of this, which is analyzed in depth, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. Now, this definition on the surface appears to be a straightforward tool for combating Jew hatred. Very good. Of course, nothing wrong with that. However, if you dissect the political project behind its adoption, the book details how pro-Israeli groups, with the support of the Israeli government, launched a highly coordinated campaign to pressure local councils, universities, and ultimately the UK government to adapt the AHRA definition along with its contested contemporary examples. These examples include claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor and applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation is per se anti-Semitic. Go figure. The book further argues that this was a masterstroke of lawfare. By embedding these politically charged examples into official policy, the Israel Advocacy Network created a mechanism to legally and administratively sanction Palestine solidarity activism. The book provides numerous case studies of how the definition has been used. On university campuses, student unions and academic bodies supporting the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement (BDS) have been accused of anti-Semitism, triggering intimidating investigations and consuming vast resources for the organizations involved. Even scholarly events examining the nature of Israel as a state have been threatened with cancellation under the IHRA guidelines, which are in effect trifling and putting a lid on free speech and academic freedom. Councillors have also that have supported motions to ethically screen the pension funds from companies involved in occupation have faced disciplinary action with their political opponents using the IHRA's definition to allege that they have created an anti-Semitic environment. The power of the definition is not that it constantly leads to successful legal convictions. Far from it. It often doesn't. But its power lies in its chilling effects. It forces institutions to self-censor to avoid contagious lawfare involvements, and which will, of course, divert energy from activism to legal defense. It creates a pervasive atmosphere of fear, where just criticizing the state's policies is rendered very perilously close to anti-Semitism. This is lawfare, not necessarily as a tool used to win something in a court of law, but lawfare as a tool to win in the court of public opinion and institutional policies within the British framework. There are other legalistic tactics. Employment tribunals. The book discusses causes where individuals have lost their jobs or face disciplinary actions from expressing simple pro-Palestinian views, often following complaints orchestrated by pro-Israeli groups on campuses. Palestinian Solidarity organizations have been subjected to repeated complaints to the Charity Commission, forcing them to expend and spend time on and money defending themselves and their charitable status, official status, which is needed to continue working. And then the cost of libel lawsuits is used to intimidate journalists and academics from publishing works critical of Israel or the advocacy network in itself. This is kind of a multi-frontal legal assault. The network seeks to shrink the space for dissent. It reframes a political conflict over land rights and military occupation as a question of racial hatred, thereby positioning its opponents not as a political adversary, but as societal moral pariahs. The strength of this book, uniting these two systems which Israel works by, is in demonstrating that the strategies, political influence and lawfare, are not separate, but are used in a deeply symbiotic nature. The political influence cultivated in Westminster is essential for the effective deployment of lawfare, and the success of lawfare in turn, strengthens the political position of Israel's advocates. The campaign for the adoption of the IHRA definition is the quintessential example of this symbiosis. The lobbying power of groups like Conservative and Labour Friends of Israel was instrumental in pressuring the UK government to formally adapt the definition in 2016. This top-down endorsement then provided the ammunition for the pro-Israeli activists at a local level to demand that universities, local authorities, and other public bodies fall into line. The government's adoption gave the definition a stamp of legitimacy, turning a politically contested document into an apparent gold standard for combating anti-Semitism, which more than often wasn't even there. This creates a self-perpetual cycle. Political access enables the creation of a favorable legal and policy environment. This environment, in turn, empowers the Israeli networks to apply pressure more efficiently, demonstrating its continued relevance and power to its donors and to the Israeli government it so desperately seeks to please. The ultimate goal, as the book posits, is to achieve ideological coercion, a situation where support for Israel is seen as the default, common sense position in British politics, while criticism is rendered not just politically costly, but legally and socially risky. And this was the situation up until the current war. Now, of course, there is a bit of a problem, and the book shows that there are limitations to the power that Israel can wield. The special relationship, which works within this lobby donation systematic infiltration, has now been forced to retreat. Uh, it focuses on lawfare, but the lawfare is now doesn't work because the law is focused on the misdeeds of the Israeli government as it currently stands. So there is now a more complex picture of the ongoing struggle. But the book clearly shows that when Israel went into this war, it did so from a position of power within the United Kingdom political establishment. So basically, Friends of Israel, the backlash against Palestine solidarity, is definitely a landmark study. It is a very sobering reminder that the battle over Palestine is not just fought with the rockets in Gaza or the protests around the world, but in the committee rooms of Westminster, the council chambers of British towns, and the legal tribunals of universities. Aked has pulled back the curtain on a very sophisticated and very powerful operation, revealing how a foreign policy consensus is very meticulously manufactured and enforced by Israel. In an era where the gap between Western government policy and the public opinion on Israel-Palestine is wider than ever, this book provides a critical toolkit for understanding how that gap was maintained prior to the current war. It's definitely an indispensable read for anyone who is trying to understand not just the politics of Israel-Palestine, but the very nature of power, influence, and dissent in modern Britain.